Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a branding guru, a speaker, a podcaster, and as all of you know, I'm very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled The Intentional Entrepreneur, Jen Dalton from Washington, D.C., USA. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jen is the founder of BrandMirror. She's a certified personal brand strategist. She's a keynote speaker. She's a panelist. She's a podcaster. And as I mentioned a little while ago, she's an author of a book titled The Intentional Entrepreneur. And we'll speak about the book. So Jen, let's start with the BrandMirror. Tell me about this venture.
Sure. BrandMirror really started as, I would say, the second part of my career.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part of my career was 10 years in the corporate space, doing operations, and then transitioning into marketing and branding, which I discovered I had a passion for. And on my 10th anniversary at the company I worked at, first out of college, I decided, I don't want to do this for the next 10 years. And in parallel, I had gone back to grad school to get my executive MBA and figure out, I know I want to do branding, but what does that mean? And as it happened, many of my classmates who were amazing really didn't know how to talk about themselves. And they started to discuss their personal brand. I researched personal brand. I went through certification on personal branding, and they really became some of my first clients. Wow. So for me, it's been all about my passion plus my purpose. And I've been fortunate. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary for BrandMirror this year.
Wow, congratulations. So, Jen, the whole subject of personal branding has really, if I can use the term, picked up steam in the last few years. Suddenly, everyone's talking personal branding. In fact, my show is also based on my book on personal branding. But for our viewers and listeners, let's start with asking you a question. What is personal branding?
When I think of personal brand, there are a few definitions that come to mind. One is your reputation. What are you known for? What's your credibility? For some people, the definition of how people talk about you when you're not in the room comes to mind. Some people think personal branding is like branding yourself as a product. I don't agree with that particular philosophy. I don't think we're products. I think we're people. So for me, it's also about promises. What are the promises you're making to your clients, your audience, your family, your friends, that when they work with you or when they're around you, what should they expect? I think personal brand is a summation of all of your experiences, but it ends up really being, how do you make people feel when you're around them?
Very interesting. And why is it becoming so important to invest in our personal brand?
Well, we all have a personal brand. Whether you manage it or not is a different question. People make assumptions, have beliefs about you. So I always say 10% of personal brand we get to define. 90% is really defined by our audience, right? Perception is reality. So I think for people, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, it's important to think about, how would you want people to talk about you? How would you declare, share, define what interests you? What's the impact you want to make? Because it's only in sharing your personal brand that you can invite other people to help you. So personal branding is not personal bragging. However, if you don't share your information, let people know what you're good at, it's very hard to stay top of mind, and it's hard to make a difference.
Fascinating. And based on the last 10 years of research and work that you've done, what are some of the factors to be taken into account when we think of personal branding?
I think of personal branding in 6 stages. I may go through them all. I don't want to bore any listeners.
We have the time.
Perfect. So the first 3 really are internal reflection. I think it's important to discover your brand. How do people perceive you? What are you known for? I think it's important then to define your values, what matters to you, what are your strengths, who's willing to pay you for your knowledge, right? And what's the difference or the change you want to see in the world? And then you have to differentiate yourself. So who else out there is trying to drive similar change or maybe have the same conversations? We can't have our personal brand in a vacuum. So a lot of it is internal reflection, which is why mirror is in the name. It's all about self-reflection. The last three steps are really about what's next, and it's external.
Okay.
How do you build your brand? How do you protect your brand? And then how do you leverage it to drive change? So as people think about their personal brand, it's very important to start internally first. Who are you? Be self-aware, and then figure out how do you want to be perceived and how do you want to show up externally?
Fascinating. You know, one of the challenges a lot of CEOs and leaders face is that they somehow or the other start to believe that they are the company and the company is them. And I've often told people that when you walk out of your company without your visiting card, 90% of your identity is lost. My question to you, Jen, is what do CEOs and leaders get wrong about branding for themselves?
Such a great point that you bring up. So many people I work with, whether it's CEO or any level, build much of their identity around their job and what they do.
Correct.
And that hurts you from a networking standpoint, from a visibility standpoint, from thinking about who can help you move into your next venture. But for CEOs specifically, I do think they get wrapped up in the company mission, the company identity, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, a CEO also needs to have their own personal mission, their own values.
Correct.
Being able to share what they stand for, what they believe in is huge. There's two studies that I always reference. One is around 40% of millennials want to work for a CEO that they believe in, that they want to be led by. And yet many CEOs are quiet and remain behind the scenes, which is another sort of opposite of not having a personal brand. They're not visible. They let the company be the brand. So there is a happy medium. The second sort of study that I'll reference, there's a great article called From Purpose to Impact from HBR. And they share that of all of the Harvard graduates in a certain time frame, only 20% of them really had a personal mission statement.
Correct.
And yet these are a lot of leaders who are going out in the world to lead companies. So would you want to follow a CEO who does not have their own personal mission? Or would you rather follow a CEO who has a personal mission and chose a company for a reason and does things outside of the office as well that really make a difference?
Amazing. Well said.
So those are a couple of things that I think CEOs might miss. And I think it's important for everyone to think about how do they want to show up. I will say one thing for CEOs and business owners. If you've started your own business, or even if you've joined a business after a founder, it is important to also think about what do you want to do with the business? If a business wants to be acquired, the CEO's brand needs to be able to flex, right? But you also need to be able to show upcoming leaders succession planning. So there's a lot more strategy behind personal branding, as you know, that I also think CEOs and leaders underestimate.
Well said. The next question to you is that in this world of very high speed platforms of social media, which are moving literally at nanoseconds, what role does social media play in a personal brand? And how do I determine which platform I should choose to invest in?
Such great questions. First, I'll take the first thing I'll answer is the last question. When I think about platform, I always ask my clients, what do you enjoy doing? Because if they don't like writing, but I ask them to blog, it's not going to happen. So I think you have to balance two questions. What do you like doing? and where is your audience?
Mm.
Hopefully, if you like to write and you like to blog, and maybe Medium is a platform, and then you also convert that onto LinkedIn, maybe it's part of the talks you give. Hopefully that's where your audience is. But if you don't like to write, let's say you like to do video, or let's say you like to not do video, but maybe you just want to do podcasts, right? You want to do audio. Then make sure you're in those channels. But you have to also be where your audience is.
Correct.
So it is a balance. Some people aren't as comfortable in some channels, and you have to stretch out of your comfort zone. But hopefully, just keep in mind, if you don't like doing something, you're not going to do it.
Very interesting. And, I was speaking to a group of leaders yesterday in one of these large companies on personal branding. And I was asked a question, and I thought I'd ask the same question from you. At what stage of one's career does one start to think about building one's personal brand?
I don't think it's realistic to think about your personal brand in your early stages of life strategically, right? It's unlikely people think about it in high school, for example. However, I talk with my children, much to their chagrin, about their personal brand. What's their reputation? How are they showing up to their teachers? So there should be a conversation about how you show up early on. And then I think when you start to be strategic about it, it's as early as you're ready to handle it. I mean, even in college, whether it's internships, class projects, those can all build evidence of your personal brand, whether it's volunteer work in high school or college. So your personal brand, as I said earlier, you always have one. The question is, what's your strategy and what's the change you want to make? Even people who are just joining the workforce should be thinking about their personal brand. One example I use, one of my clients, the CEO does not like writing a blog. So I suggested, well, why don't you have your new hires interview you and write that blog, right? Write about the 5 questions they asked you, what you discussed. Then you'll have content that you as a CEO can leverage. And your new hire gets to meet you, gets to meet the CEO, and also gets to contribute content early on. So for me, it's not a question of you can't start building your personal brand until a certain age. It's more, what's the best way to do it? What's the strategy behind it? And being creative is sometimes a requirement to make that happen, but it can definitely happen early.
Interesting. My next question to you is, what is the impact of culture? And I'm talking about it from, culture of different individuals. What is the impact of culture on personal brands?
I think your personal brand is the culmination of everything. So culture is critical. And culture is a reflection of your values and who you are. I think depending on each person, you can decide how much you want to share, how much you want people to know about your culture. And it depends on how much of it is a part of who you are as an individual. I do think many times people are much more interested in talking about themselves than learning about other people. And it's only through listening and being interested in other people that we can actually be more interesting. And many people make assumptions about someone's background or culture, which is why it can be a great way to kick off a discussion and get to know someone. But I think culture is very important if it's important to the person you're speaking with.
Very interesting. And another question that I've often been asked is behavioral change a precursor to building a strong personal brand?
I think it depends what you mean by behavioral change. When I think of behavioral change, there are some people who naturally put themselves out there and are extroverts or ambiverts like myself, where sometimes I want to be an extrovert. However, when my energy is run out, I'm ready to be an introvert. But there are behavioral changes. I think practicing empathy, practicing listening to people, practicing one of my favorites, which is a book that I've written as well called Listen. It's about difficult conversations. So many of the behavioral changes I think we struggle with right now are attention, right? We have so many things thrown at us, so much noise. How do we break through that noise and really connect with people? So getting to know people, getting to like them, getting to trust them. Those are some of the behavioral changes that I hope for, being more understanding, and also understanding that every person has something to offer. Maybe they don't speak the way you want them to. Maybe they don't come across the way you want them to.
Correct.
But everyone has something to offer. And I think sometimes we are checking our phone all the time, rushing around all the time. We forget to pause and step back. Those are the moments where I think someone's personal brand really can shine and where those deep connections really can happen.
Wonderful. One more question for you on personal branding before I move to your book. On our books, I didn't realize you've got a second book, Listen, which is just behind you or over your right shoulder. But if someone reaches out to you to build their personal brand, what is the process you follow?
I always meet with people to learn about them, to learn about their goals, make sure we're the right fit. There's lots of people on the planet. There's plenty of potential clients. There's plenty of competitors. It's really, are they a good fit for me? And am I a good fit for them? Can I give them the most value? Do our values align? Can I really help them with the problem they're trying to solve? And so I always do a complimentary session and really get to know someone first before making a decision on should we work together, because it needs to work for both of us. Personal branding is a very deep topic. We're going to talk about a lot of things. Sometimes my clients call me their therapist. I don't know that I want to be called a therapist, but your personal brand has a lot behind it, right? It's not a superficial thing.
Correct.
So you have to make sure you're the right fit for someone.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, which is what can hurt a personal brand?
One of the things I mentioned earlier is not being able to pause and really reflect on how you want to respond.
Right.
So I do think there's we have a lot of stimuli and noise that get thrown at us. And it seems things get even more and more heated, whether we're talking about politics or climate change. Everything seems to have this undercurrent, this stress related to it. So I think one of the things that can hurt our personal brand is not listening, is not slowing down and really being present. I, of course, think that when people don't follow their values, when people are inauthentic, when people do something that's not nice, right? I mean, there's something to be said for treat others how you want to be treated.
Correct.
Even if you don't like them, you can still be polite.
Correct.
And a lot of times I think people move into the escalating tempers, get angry, hurt someone's feelings, and take a deep breath, ask a question, listen, learn. But those are the things now that I think really do impact someone's personal brand.
Fabulous. So Jen, now let's move to your book, The Intentional Entrepreneur. Tell me about this book and your hypothesis when you wrote this book.
So The Intentional Entrepreneur, it's written 5, almost 6 years ago. And I wanted to think differently about my business. So for example, the first year I started my business, I helped and coached 10 people. The second year, 100 people. The third year, spoke to or coached 1,000 people. But it was in that third year where I thought, if I want to keep doubling my impact like this and growing my impact, I need to do something differently. And that's what convinced me to write a book and to capture in the book the process I use for developing someone's personal brand to help grow their business brand. And within it, I've woven in 20 different examples of clients I've worked with at different stages. You know, what's their purpose? What's their why? As they go to start their business, what do they name their business? As they go to think about the best clients for them, what does that look like, right? Being very specific to be terrific. Making sure that you're not trying to market to everyone, because then you're marketing to no one. So the book really is a process around that. And I loved highlighting the amazing businesses that I either worked with or knew the founders and was able to interview them and share real examples.
Fascinating. And your second book, Listen, I can see it behind you with an ostrich with its head in the sand. Tell me about this book.
So I often have people ask me, what does Listen have to do with personal branding? And I would say, you know, being in the US, politics have definitely been very heated in the last 5 to 10 years. And I remember one morning, I was talking with my husband and he said something and I had a really visceral reaction where I was angry and I was like, I'm mad. And it was so, it was almost like time stopped. I was thinking, why am I reacting this way? I don't understand, right? So I started to do research, started to practice. If someone does say something, what is triggering that reaction? How can we step back, take a breath? And my husband and I do have different political views. And how can we talk about politics and not be frustrated? Because I think part of your personal brand is being able to share what you believe.
Correct.
And also being able to learn, change your mind, grow, develop. And so for me, you know, writing this book, I interviewed 30 different people who were fantastic and shared what was their most difficult conversation ever. And some of them were personal, some of them were business related, but it was meant to be a guide to how can you navigate these conversations that we need to have, whether it's maybe you have a child who is coming out, maybe you have a parent who is getting dementia. How do you take care of them? Maybe you want to negotiate for a raise or different, you know, benefits at work. Like those are stressful, difficult conversations, but we can't avoid them. We're going to have them, you know, whether we like it or not. And so at the end of the book, I share the framework that works for me. What I find when I name something, it helps me navigate it. So I share a framework at the end of the book around here's how you could think about difficult conversations to help control your emotions and really give space to the person you're speaking with and seek to understand, right? And really listen. And, you know, one of the hardest challenges for me was going into any conversation, understanding that I could be totally wrong. Because if you think about how many conversations we have where we think, of course, we're right, like this is the answer. But we could be wrong. There's so many perspectives out there. There's so many things we can learn from people around us. So for me, it started out as a personal journey. And it really evolved into this notion of to have an authentic personal brand, we have to be able to be ourselves. And to be able to be ourselves, we have to be able to have difficult conversations.
Fantastic. One last question about your books. Are both your books, Listen and The Intentional Entrepreneur, available on Amazon and other platforms?
They are. They're on Amazon. They're distributed widely across a lot of different book platforms and channels. So
wonderful.
Easy to find.
Thank you. And so I'm going to tell all my viewers and listeners that go and just search for Jen Dalton, look out for her book. I will certainly go and check it out myself and then take a call whether you'd like to buy it or not. But Jen, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me at such length about personal branding. I mean, I've learned a lot of new things from you today on personal branding. Thank you for talking to me about both your books. And I particularly liked, just your hypothesis of listen and the amazing examples or stories you gave me about how we need to be able to listen to one another. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much for your podcast. Thank you for the amazing interview and questions. I cannot wait to keep following you, listening to you, and learning through you as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.